Tirohia Karioi ka tauria e te kohu Koa hau hoki ka tauria e te aroa e He puna wai mata ki runga o Karioi He puna wai wera aku Roi mata e. Karioi is the maunga of the takiwā of this place, of this area. We see it every day, every morning, every night. When we come over from whatawhata, the deviation, the first thing we see is Karioi. When we're coming over the Kaimai Ranges, we can see the tip of it. It's a beacon of home. It embodies all of the narratives, all of the whakapapa and the connections to other maunga, other iwi, hapu, within Aotearoa and within Waikato katoa.
My name's Oliver McLeod. I'm a local geologist. It's one of the hats I wear. I originally come from Auckland. I grew up between Auckland City and Karioi Island in the Hauraki Gulf. Went to school in Auckland and then I went and did my studies at Otago. Yeah, my first memories were, like a lot of people, coming to swim at Naranui Beach, and I have faint memories of looking up and seeing this ginormous peak. But like most young people, you're more focused on the waves at that point. But I do remember seeing this peak and it being kind of a bit mysterious. Eventually came to do a PhD at Waikato University, and my first field trip of the PhD was to Karioi. I travelled to Raglan on the bus and then started walking up towards the maunga with a kind of feeling of the enormity of Karioi as a research subject. Coming from a sort of classically trained geology angle, I can remember the main turning point was that when I was at the University of Waikato and went to see Professor Tom Roa. That was the point at which he took me under his wing to introduce me to te ao Māori and mātauranga Māori in relation to Pirongia maunga. The pūrākau that many people know is that Karioi and Pirongia were sisters, and that they both lived inland together with Karioi's husband Kārewa, so that we see the genealogical link between the three volcanic peaks. And it was then there was an affair between Kārewa and Pirongia. Karioi fled to the coast, Kārewa followed and was banished offshore. The children of Karioi and Kārewa are scattered between them. And that last detail really stood out to me as a curiosity, because We know that the Aotearoa volcanic formation, which consists of dozens of small volcanic cones around Karioi, those are essentially the children of Karioi. Or if you personify the maunga, those would be the children. But there's also this other detail in the pūrākau, which is that the children are also spread between Karioi and Karewa, as in offshore. And many years later, as I began my studies, I uncovered offshore surveys which indicated that there are dozens of volcanic cones which lie submerged between the two maunga, and those would be the children. Some of them coincide with reefs, and those reefs would be important fishing spots, or continue to be to this day.
Ko Angeline Ngahina Greensela Hau, I te taha o tuku whaia, ko Karioi te maunga, ko Whāingaroa te moana, ko Tainui te waka. Te taha o tuku pāpa, ko Hikurangi te maunga, ko Waiapu te aua, ko Ngāti Parau, ko Ngāti Rua Waipu, ngā iwi. So that's the connections that we have, that I have through my mother to this place. We're sitting here on Rangipu, which is Ngāti Haunuku land, which is one of my hapus. So I'm Ngāti Kōata, I'm quite a few different hapus from all along the coast. So that's through my mother. So those are the connections to Whāingaroa Raglan. My dad was from the other side of the world, over on the East Coast. And so my connections to the East Coast are through my dad. And through other countries like Ireland, Spain, Brazil. Our family, my grandmother, my grandparents are buried up on this hill here. She was from the south, and my grandfather was from here, from Tainui. I have 9, we had 9 in our family. I have 6 brothers, 2 sisters. If you look across the Raglan Harbour, you can see a place called Horea, and over there was an ancestor of ours called Puniatikore. She married a guy at Whale Bay, and from them come most of the Tainui people along the west coast. Can't remember much before I was 3, but I know at 4 we moved to live in this house. We used to live above, at Rose Street, above the football ground. My dad was a keen footballer at the time. He was working on the wharf, and he was also working in the exchange downtown, the post office, so we were living in town. And then this house was built up here at a time when Māori Affairs were dishing out money. And so my grandfather said to my mother, come and build up here. The road had been put up for a marae to be built up behind us, up below the Urupa, but it had never been built. And he was concerned that maybe the land would disappear, so he got my mother to come and build a house here. So that's how we came up here when I was 4 years old. And it was a great childhood. I mean, we had ourselves, I guess. We had no neighbours. We had cousins down the hill, our grandparents down the hill. And typical of the times, I think, rural communities, a lot of kids went home after school and just stayed home and did their chores. And we were no different. We had things to do. Growing up, we had a lot of responsibility, come home, get the veggies ready for dinner. That's how my dad was brought up. That's how we were brought up. You know, we had lots of people whāngaid here. So, you know, when there were too many people, my mother would put a big marquee tent out the back, then the boys would be kicked out the back, and other people would be in the house. So that was the type of house I grew up in. Probably my fondest childhood memory was being rowed across the Raglan Harbour to Horongārara by my dad in a rowboat with my mum, a couple of my brothers, sister, all in this little rowboat going there to get blackberries. But the best thing about the trip was looking down and seeing all the fish and everything underneath the boat. It was so clear. The water was so clean. And, you know, that's a memory I have that, you know, it's not there today, but that's what I recall. And the other one was down here, there's a river down here where all the kids in the tribe used to meet. So I don't know what our parents did, but we used to go in the summer, we'd spend all of our time in the river. From the time the tide came in until the time it disappeared, probably my not so fond memory was having to go and sit at the gate at Whale Bay with my cousins all day. People would pay 2 shillings, which is about 20 cents, to get in and park on our land to go to Whale Bay for a picnic. And it was really a busy time. We would sit on the gate from about, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning till about 3 or 4 in the afternoon, just taking money off people. And that money went to pay the rates, because if you didn't pay your rates, they took your land off you. And so that helped to pay the rates and keep the land. My dad was a great gardener, and I mean, when I can remember when I was little how my grandparents were still alive, and they had a couple of draft horses, and they used to plough up the paddock down here and plant it in, you know, komokomos, potatoes, kumaras. There was huge gardens. And then when the harvesting time came, people would gather and, you know, dig up. And I mean, if we got our garden in first, we'd go over the road there and help the ones on the other side of the creek to put their gardens in. But I mean, money was not something people thought about. It was as long as you had food, and the food, we were really lucky. You live by the sea, you've got freshwater fish, you've got the coast, you've got kaimoana up here, and you've got at the time in the forest you could get pigeons that are just before they became illegal. And then you had, of course, the veggies. So you're really healthy food. We had a ballet teacher. I had to go to ballet. We were forced to go to ballet and tap dancing. Mrs. Petrel taught most kids, you know, that you could grab, and had to go and learn music as well. You know, out at Okete from Mrs. Turner. So had to learn how to play the piano and participate in things like that.
Ko Claire, tōku ingoa. I'm Claire Jackson, and I was born in Raglan, raised on the farm, and apart from a few years away raising my family in other parts of New Zealand, I've been back here off and on for the last 35 years. About my family, it was myself and my brother Malcolm who grew up on the farm, and we had a lot of cousins and wider whānau with us because Dad was one of 5, and a lot of them lived nearby, and we were very connected to the farm, which was lovely. My great-grandparents, my great-grandfather came here in 1880. He was from quite a poor family in England, and he met up with another family who said, oh, we're going to New Zealand, you come with us and help us get set up and we'll help you. He came out with them. They were the Ward family, and they built their farmhouse just a couple of k's down the road. Some people might remember it was old Ferncliff House, and then we had it for a hay barn when we were kids. And then my great-grandfather came up and built the homestead here, and my great-grandparents met at what is now Swan's farm over the back there. She was burning stumps. She came to be a housekeeper for her brother, and she always said she'd been a bridesmaid 19 times. And then she got married. They were both 40, and they said, we're going to get married and have 2 children. And apparently everybody laughed at them, but they did. And the 2 children were Jack, my grandfather, and Eliza, John's mother. When we were kids, people would just turn up on their horses visiting. People would drop in on each other a lot more. And I think now, you know, people like more plan. They don't just call in, they plan to call in. And so you have this contrast of, you know, people going past on the road and the road being quite busy, but, you know, people not necessarily dropping in from around the district like they used to. Yeah, so people might have thought we had a very isolated childhood in a way, and in a way we did. And we were, you know, we were really lucky. We were bathed in nature, and it was our playground and our workplace. But in another way, you know, the swans and neighbours were always toing and froing, and other neighbours and other family. So in that way, it wasn't lonely in that sense. In fact, Mum and Dad used to count the number of visitors that would come on a long weekend, and she'd tell everyone, 32 people today, on an Easter Sunday or something, you know, she'd have all the tins full, and people would come to, oh, let's go and see Jean and Tom, no, all the way out there and never get any visitors. She'd be all prepared. Oh, we had our set walks we'd go on. So the adults would have these walks they would go on, and the children would trail behind, run in front, run behind, playing with sticks, fighting, picking blackberries, you know. So they had their set walks. They'd go down to old Ferncliff House down the road, and there was an old path. They used to walk down there, and they'd, you know, be talking and walking along there. And I remember it'd be a sunny day, and the cicadas are screaming. And they'd go to the old homestead, and they'd always look for the same things, and I do it too with my children. There's a little patch of primroses. They still grow in the pasture. They're still there, and they flower every spring. There's a little sort of like an old garden with an old box hedge, and those plants are still there, and we go and look at those. There used to be there was even an old wagon parked there when I was a child. We'd go and play on that. that was left behind when the family left.
My name is Betty Rawley now, but I was born Betty Jackson. This area was alive with Jacksons, and this is where I came from. I would have been brought up on the side of the mountain, on the seaward side of the mountain, in a very isolated area, except that my mother, having married my father from there, was determined that her children were going to get an education. So she managed to buy a little area nearer to Raglan and shifted us children there so that we could go to school. And she managed to get a few dairy cows and start to turn it into a farm just in Wainuku Road, about 3 miles out of Raglan. I didn't actually grow up here, but in the holidays we would be piled onto a wagon when we were very small, or would be riding ponies as we grew. And once the holidays came, we all came round here to help my father try to farm it, but we were more interested in fishing and going down to the beach and getting shellfish. Yes, I had to get a bus from Hamilton to Raglan once I'd come down from Auckland, and it was the bus driver who told me where my parents were. He knew everything, and he said, "You won't find them at home at your Raglan, the Raglan house. They're round the coast." And so he kindly gave me a lift up Wainuku Road to my house, which was empty. So I caught a horse and rode all the way around the mountain to their house here. And much to their surprise, they said, "Don't ever do it again." I watched the dawn come up actually over the mountain. I was pleased to come round a corner over there and see the house and know that I was actually going to get there.
I'm Jeff Rawley. My connection to this place is this was part of my mother's farm, and as a child I would come out to visit my Uncle Tom and Auntie Jean and stay on the farm with my cousins, and I always loved coming out here. My family grew up in Toitū. We had a batch out at Whale Bay when nobody went to Whale Bay. In fact, nobody went to Raglan. It came from a time when there were about 6 batches at Whale Bay, and it was a one-way dirt track, basically. If you met another car, somebody had to back up. And if you saw somebody at Whale Bay who wasn't from those half a dozen batches, you sort of think, well, what are they doing here? It's quite different now. It's, far more people come there. In fact, it's, traffic jams down there now. When we were kids, probably when I was about 15, my father and my brother and I cut a track up from the back of Whale Bay up onto up the ridgeline and to the peaks of Karioi, and marked it with little offcuts of Phoenician blind we nailed to the trees so we could find our way up. And we used to mainly go up there to shoot goats, which were a real pest on Karioi at the time. But we occasionally would walk up over the mountain and down the ridgeline to this farm, Tirohia, where I am now. And it was quite it was a full day's walk.
I'm John Tucker, son of Eliza Tucker and Edwin Tucker. Eliza Tucker was born on this farm in 1899 on the 28th of March. It was very, very free. I think my sisters were a bit jealous of me because I had a lot more liberty than they did. I'd disappear and just turn up for food, I think. In the primary school at Raglan, John Hartstone happened to be in the same class as me. We used to go out and create mischief there. It backs onto the Karioi, and it's the first bit of land to be hit by the weather. You don't need rain radar here, you can look out and you can see the rain coming.
I am Malcolm Jackson. I'm a farmer here. I've been a farmer I've been the farmer of this place for 25 years, and before that I was farmhand for my father for 20 years, and before that I grew up here. I've been here all my life, and I'm the fourth generation on this farm, which is a strip of land between Mount Karioi and the sea. It used to go away from Te Toto Gorge to Papanui Point, but before that bit got sold, it used to all be farmed from Te Toto Gorge with sheep and cattle, and they actually at one stage carried about 3,000 sheep, and it was measured. I left school just about the time New Zealand was approaching its peak of sheep, and this farm was no exception. This farm was all fertiliser and scrub cutting and fences, and we never really tamed it. We never really tamed the other end. I mean, I was homeschooled, so I had time out here, and my father and I would go down the cliffs and get crayfish and paua and mussels, but it seems to me there's only paua now. About when I was about 12, there was an invasion of kina, and they killed off all the long kelp, and when the long kelp goes, the crayfish also go, so I'm told. But yes, I haven't seen any long kelp or crayfish since. The road used only to come from the south to here, and this was the terminus. And even though we're in many ways closer to Raglan by the north, our electricity and our old phone line come from the south, because that's where the road was, and that's where the mail run still is. But this redundant road for decades, it was just a dirt track, and then in the mid-70s they decided to turn it into a functional road, which they did, which was quite helpful for getting to Raglan. But then it meant a lot of tourists and traffic about. Having friends out to stay, my mother was quite a sociable woman, had a lot of social networks, and lots of other kids had come out and do camping and stuff. Yeah, had a lot of enjoyment playing around and played with bows and arrows and stuff. Well, it's very comfortable. It's connected to the internet, which is a good thing. That's the road. There's a lot of traffic, so the road always needing a lot of work on it, and the drive isn't always comfortable. Sometimes the road is corrugated, but yeah, and there's a lot of facilities in Raglan. I can drive in there quite easily.
My name's Philip Swan, and my connection to Ruapuki dates back to 1860. The first Swan that came here was Captain Swan, and he bought some land at Ruapuki, or Papanui, sorry, and he started a family, and as that family grew, he bought more land, and we own land all the way up to the mountain and down to Karioi Road. When I talk about my dad's life and upbringing, he had 6 brothers and sisters, so 7 in total. So where they were living isolated out at Papanui, they all had to do correspondence. You know, Granddad and his brothers all had farms, so in total land area, there was probably around 2,000 acres of farm. I'm actually still on one of the original parts of our farm, so we've been on this land here since, well, 1860. We're Dad at Karioi Road, that's about 1920. It would have been real hard back in the 50s, you know, like the correspondence that they had to do. They had to ride from their place down the beach to Ruapuki Beach Road, and that was where they had to get their mail collected from. You know, like at Papanui, the road didn't get there until 1952, and so the only way for Dad to get out was to ride a horse up the beach. And then Dad talks about his granddad having to ride a horse to Kawhia to say, I've got some wool for sale, and then riding back up to Papanui and then working out when the tide was going to be right, and then they put all the wool on a barge, and then the barge would go out to the boat. Definitely hard work, and I think that's what you learn about living out here, the resilience that the first settlers had. Yeah, in the 60s electricity came through, so, you know, modern technology. Still had a dirt road. Yeah, and that's only going back, what, 70 years, so it's not that long ago. Living here at Karioi has made me who I am, I suppose. You know, going to a local primary school at Timata, you know, on a dirt road, having neighbours for friends, and just playing and just being a kid and just loving living out in the country. Well, I guess so some of the special things that happened when we were little kids was every school holidays, James Sweetman, Campbell, Hill, Stephen Trollope, my cousin, would all go up the mountain, and Mum would give us some, or all the mums would give us some food, and we'd go for the whole day, and that was an adventure, you know. So you can't beat, you know, kids just having fun, and it was all innocent, you know. No one worried about what might happen to you, and we knew where to go because it was up the mountain, and we knew when to come home because it was dark, and that was our day. It was awesome. Hey, the things that I experienced when I was growing up would be, you know, our family is probably quite poor compared to other people, and you know, so we went to Timata School, we went to Raglan Area High School, and other friends didn't go to those schools, they went over the hill to Hamilton. But once you became an adult, those things didn't matter anymore. So it made you appreciate what you have by living out here. So yeah, I finished my school at Raglan and started my apprenticeship in Hamilton. So 2006 we moved back, and the countryside had changed due to all the subdivisions. You know, you call them lifestylers, but they've come to enjoy and appreciate how lucky we are to live out here. So they've got their own journey on what it means for them to live here, and for us, we're just lucky to still have the farm. Back then, everyone helped dig graves, so I'm now the 4th generation grave digger. Dad said, you know, do you want to, you know, dig a grave? And Dad supervised me digging. Fast forward a few years, and all my 3 boys have dug graves, so they're now 5th generation grave diggers.
Yes, I'm Terry Nolan, and I was born in 1947, and I've lived in this area most of my life. My family, we were brought up in Timata. There was 8 siblings. We had a good life. We weren't the richest people in town, so we lived pretty straightforward life, but it was great. My mum and dad, they had a pony stud. We had just a little farm, about 40 acres, and they bred these ponies, and so we all had ponies and horses as time went on, and we all rode horses to school. The school had a horse paddock in those days, so we would ride off to school in the morning. I remember my first day at school, I went on the back of a pony called Bess with my older sister Laurie. And when we got nearly to the school, Bess shied and leapt sideways, and the saddle flew clean underneath her belly, and we ended up on the ground. That was my first day at school. I used to ride my horse. I would go home in the weekends to Timata, and I had a very good horse, and I would ride my horse to work. It was about 8 miles on a Monday morning. I always remember because, you know, we always start work at 8. I used to go and milk the house cow at 7, at Jack's, who was Mr. Trollope, of course, in those days. And I remember one morning I got there at 7:10, and he gave me a stern telling off for not arriving at 7 to milk the cow. In those days, I was also doing SAR work, search and rescue stuff. Got a phone call from the police here, Kevin Holmes. He said, "Oh, we need you to come over. There's 13 school children missing on the mountain." They had gone from there and they had a couple of teachers with them. And by this time, it was probably 9 o'clock at night, pitch black. I said, "Drop me up there on the corner, up past Sam's." And he did, and said, "Come on boys, we're off." And for 15 minutes I went straight up this ridge, right up into the mountain a bit, only 15 minutes. And then I said, "Sit down and listen." And I found those children right then. It took 4 hours for us to reach them. They were right up high up in a big gully up in the back of the mountain there. And we found them and had them winched out by helicopter in the morning.
My name's Greg Corns. My connection to this place, which was Te Huruwai Road, Raglan. I was born here, been here all my life, apart from when we moved out to the coast with my wife. Yeah, I think, I was just thinking the other day actually, Mum would have been 99 this year, so she would have been born just along the road. And then Mum and Dad bought this farm when I was probably, I don't know, not sure, it was before I was born or when I was just after I was born. Probably think it was before I was born, so I'm 65. He said he got together with Mum when they were in primary school, when they had danced with the little girl in primary school, so yeah. And then they bought the other end of the farm in the 70s off my mother's family. My mother's family name was Shay. Yeah, I never knew my grandparents, they died before I was born, so yeah. So I knew all the uncles, obviously. Dad was born in Tamata, or Ruapuki, halfway between. And there's Corns, family of 7 or 8. Same with my mother. All had big families back then. Well, not as much has changed about the farm, apart from what we farm. The bush has definitely thickened up. And yeah, we've got, I think it's about probably 5 kilometres of boundary with Karioi, so right along the back boundary of the farm. Well, all the paddocks have got names. It was Apple Tree Paddock and Purity Paddock and Toitū Paddock and yeah, Henhouse Paddock, you name it. Everything had most of the things that they're named after no longer exist. They're all gone. None of the trees that were there are there anymore. They've all gone. So the names have outlasted the source of the name. Karioi and the coast have influenced my life well, it's been my life really. Haven't really known anything else apart from working in town for a few years, but even then I was out here all the time. So yeah, I don't know, my life, this is my life. Scenery spectacular. I'm just, whenever if you're feeling down about things, you just go up the back of the farm and just have a look at the view and yeah, everything comes into perspective, I suppose. So.
I te puaki ana i ngā rua wahe, ko Tainui Waka, ko Ngāpuhi, and Ngāti Parau i Tūwhare Tōhoki. I grew up in Ngaruahia and I moved out here in my early teaching years and I've been out here for nearly 30 years now.
Kia ora, my name is Kimihia Te Waiō Karioi Solomon Banks. I was born and raised in Raglan. Been here for 26 years of my life. This is our whenua. We are 300 metres high above the ocean sea level, about 88 acres. Just a little farm whenua for us here. I was born here on the mountain, a home birth straight into the waters that they had gathered, home birth in a kind of paddling pool. I really wanted to give birth to my first child here on Karioi, connecting her to her
whenua from this side of the maunga. So my father's mother is from Aotearoa. From the Tauranga stream side, it's called Schneckenbergs as they know it these days, and his whānau family plot and brothers and sisters is there. So to connect her to our tupuna on that side.
Growing up on the mountain itself was incredible. It kind of was like a wild thornberries-esque. You felt like you could just do whatever you wanted, be barefoot running around, straight in the dirt, so much imagination play because you could just go off into the woods, have a great time by myself and my imagination would just run wild.
Family had very good family friends, the McFarlanes from Tirohia, and they had a store in Tirohia, so very quite local, and they had a back here down by the wharf called the Happy Days House. And so we would come here as a little family with my dad, my mum and my brothers and sisters. There's a photo of me, I think I'm like 3 months old, having a bottle and hanging out on the deck and Whāingaroa with the wharf behind. So a lot of our times we're out here coming to visit the aunties and uncles and getting pippies. Mum and Dad love the cockles and Dad will go to do a puke and go get mussels.
Tēnā tātou katoa, he mihi kauana kia koutou, ko tae mai. Ko Tairuke Thompson, taku ingoa, no kona iahau. My name is Tairuke Thompson. I'm one of 13. We were brought up at a place called Te Mākaka, which is on the coast about 3 kilometres from here. We all went to school, all of us at Timata, and then we spread out to different schools after that, high schools. My father was from Ruapuke, a 4th generation Pākehā. His whakapapa is to Scotland. My mother is 35 plus generations, including the hapu from here, whakamarurangi, but we're related through our mother to all the tribes on the west coast, from Tahinga, Koata, Ngāti Kārewa, Ngāti Toa, and to Ngāti Haurua Mahanga at Waipa. We had 7 brothers and 5 sisters, and we were all raised at Te Mākaka, which is a very old settlement of our people. And then the settlement shifted from there to more tako, where we've got our wharenui, te ranga a tainui, and other buildings there that we've just recently completed. I have lots of memories from this area, growing up with my family here. I think, but probably the ones that I hold most are those of riding up here between the Te Mākaka and more tako on horseback with my father, mustering and shifting cattle, shifting stock, and also riding along the beach to my grandmother's house at Ruapuke. So 3 of us on the horse, and my father in the middle, and 1 in front and 1 at the back. And often we'd take a little bag where we'd stay the night with our grandmother, and then we'd hop on the bus at Ruapuke to go to school. But my father was I always say that that generation of people went from the plough to the Concord in a generation. They farmed with the old draft horses and ploughed and did all the work with those. Everybody then was competent in fixing everything. They were jacks of all trades, even with the horses he had. I remember when they used to round up the wild horses that were at Aotearoa, which is just south, the big sandblock area. So there used to be big herds of wild horses over there. And I remember as a child when my father and other neighbours would go out and round some up because they would need fresh horses, and they would bring them back to our stockyards, and we could hear them coming from miles away, just the sound of them. And they would get them into the stockyards, and they would just pick out the ones that they wanted to keep, and the rest would go to horochu. My father would train them, break them in, the horses that he wanted, shoe them and have them as stock horses. So we had a little stable there, and he did all the training, all the breaking in, all the shoeing, all about horses, just like everybody of that era did at that time. But that's one thing I remember, which they don't use now. Horses are for leisure now, but then they were workhorses.
My name's Dallas Mihinui. I was born in Whanganui, brought up in Karioi, and currently am residing in Whāingaroa. Moved here in 2013 and have been here since. That being said, I was always out here in Whāingaroa at a very young age, in the late 70s, early 80s. My grandmother lived here then, and we spent a lot of time out here as young tamariki, spending Christmases, holidays with our grandmother who lived on Cliff Street. Yeah, a lot of fond memories of Whāingaroa growing up, and very proud to be able to come back many years later, me and my wife, our tamariki and our moko. Biggest memory for me coming out to Whāingaroa was at a very young age on Cliff Street, gathering kaimoana with my parents and staying at my grandmother's. One huge thing that always stood out for me was my cousin and my nanny actually telling me that dessert jelly came from jellyfish, and that thing always stuck in my head because I always believed that it's where jelly came from, was jellyfish. And yeah, I believed that for many years until I was told that it was actually jelly crystals.
Ti hei mauri ora ko Simon te whioro tōku ingoa, he uri au no ngā maru o Karioi maunga. Ko Karioi te maunga, ko Whāingaroa te moana, ko Tainui te waka, ko Ngāti Mahanga, Ngāti te wehi, Ngāti Koata, Ngāti Tamunupo, ngā hapu. He whakapapa hoku tēnei ki Germany, English, ana hoki ko Irish. My hononga, my connections here to Whāingaroa are through the whānau Gillet, whānau Waitere, whānau Maniapoto. Those are my whānau whakapapa here into Whāingaroa. Being raised by uncles, aunties, nannies. In my whānau papakainga, the Gillet whānau papakainga, Greenslade Road, my parents had the whakaaro, the idea to have us submerged in Te Ao Māori, and I attended Raglan Area School, and my parents put me in Te Ropu Aroha ki Te Reo. It was there that I managed to obtain a lot of tikanga Māori, completed my bursary studies at Te Wharakura o Rākau Mangamanga in Huntly, and then went from Rākau Manga on to Toi Haukura, which is a contemporary Māori art school in Turanganui a Kiwa, Gisborne. Managed to obtain a Bachelor of Arts degree, and then had the inspiration or passion to move back home to Whāingaroa and to pursue a career in Toi Māori. Growing up as a child, I had lots of influences in my life. My father was really involved in the community. He had a clothing factory established here down at near the Kōkiri. Being inspired by my father's creativity, which led me to follow suit basically, to a lot of drawing. I don't think at that particular time I wanted to pursue a career in the arts. I think it just evolved over time, just naturally, just being raised in an environment with aroha. You know, I guess we invest that time in aroha into any child, it's inevitable that they're going to become fruitful, I guess, in that environment. So really blessed and thankful for not only my father, witnessing my father in his skills, but also my mother as well. You know, they're both huge inspirations in my life. My father was a tailor, and he would often share stories of, you know, his teachings from an Italian. And yeah, he was a man of many talents. He could weave. He was a weaver. He loved to sing. But yeah, it was growing up as a child, witnessing him draw, and often going to marae, you know, being engaged in hapu events, led me to question different art forms that I was witnessing, and my dad was educating me around the, you know, elements of whakaero, tuku. Although my father wasn't a big orator in te reo Māori, you know, he still possessed a strong connection through tikanga, and it led me to just follow suit, like I said. And yeah, it was a huge inspiration in my life to the mahi that I do today.
Rakatauda, who was the tohunga aboard the waka of Tainui. So he set up his tuahu at the taumata of Karioi. On that taumata, he also deposited the mauri. Tohunga of old could do that. It's to ensure that you've got the permanence of resources for your people. Since Karioi was a maunga covered in all manner of trees, many of them bearing seeds and fruits for bird life, it was a perfect place to put that mauri there to ensure that the resources would always be there.
This whole farm was all bush, you know, 200 years ago. So Dad pointed out to me on the back of Karioi that there's still some remu trees that haven't been chopped down, and Dad said that what saved those remu trees was World War II, because all the soldiers obviously left New Zealand to go overseas to fight, and when they came back there were less of them, and to get those trees out, it wasn't worth them doing. So when you look on the horizon, you can still see some trees, and so those were saved, you know, thanks to a war on the other side of the world. All the hills in the front of us along the sea line, on the coastline, were all flax paddocks, and someone back at the turn of the 1905 sort of era, they dug a channel from up in the bush, and it went all the way around to above the motor camp, where there's a pond, and then from that pond they put a pipe in, and that pipe ran down into the motor camp, and that's where they had a flax mill to make rope. Back in 1860, the whole place was a forest. So Captain Swan had some children and family and things like that, and back in 1880, the paddock right behind me where these pine trees are, some Irish people turned up called O'Shea's, and in 1880 they started clearing that land. All the Kānuka and Mānuka that you can see regrowth is like a third regrowth. My uncle Leonard owned this part of the farm. He started clearing the bush with a bulldozer, and he said he'd start at the bottom of the hill and he'd start a fire, and then he'd stoke the fire with a bulldozer. Dad said the longest fire he had going out here was about 2.5 months.
The only thing that stuck in my mind was my grandfather's diary when I read it. All he had entered in it was bush. So it must have been pretty wearing for him. No chainsaws or anything.
Around Karioi, there were at one stage at least 7 timber mills operating, which shows also the amount of huge trees, the timber resource that was once there, even in Ruapuke. It was difficult for settlers to get to Ruapuke from Te Mata at that time because of the incredible stands of bush there. Huge stands of pūrere, rimu, all kinds of trees. It was early exploited timber merchants. Much of the telephone crossbars and the old telegraph poles were made out of rata from Karioi. So you can imagine the amount that went out from there.
We used to have a lot of possums, but we've managed to knock back those numbers. When I was quite young, possums all over the place, all over the garden, and all over the roof actually. And my father used to get so irritated he'd go outside and with a rifle and just shoot them off the roof, and you could hear them tumbling down. And and trappers would come and get hundreds and hundreds of them in a week. But there seems to be a working strategy to push the numbers down further and further.
I had a friend, very good friend, who was a very good possum trapper, and he put some time into me, and I decided to leave all that and come back here and go possum trapping and poisoning and shooting and whatever else, yeah. And so that's what I did. For about 15 years I did that. When I first came over, I didn't have any of the mountain. I just did local blocks, and then I talked to the ranger at Tirohia Forest Park, and he decided I could have half of Karioi Mountain because Bill McCabe, who was a well-known trapper, hunter, he had the other half, and he had some very good friends out here, the Sweetman family. The possum block system wasn't strictly legal, even though it was run by DOC, because actually it's a noxious animal, and if you applied for a permit to hunt them, they were actually required to give you one. But anyway, it worked because possum hunters had a block, then they could concentrate on it, not have a whole lot of fly-by-nighters coming through. He had the front half of the mountain, which was the more sunny side. Like all animals, they enjoy that type of country better. And I did the backside, Jacksons and round to Tate's and stuff. And then one day he rang me up and he said, I'm not going to go over there anymore, you can have the whole lot. There were possums everywhere then. I would go to John Swan's maybe at least once a week and shoot 40 or 50 in a night, just roaming around. And at the same time, I'll be running my trap line. I was running the 250 in a line, and I would run them in little short lines of 10, otherwise you lose them. So you do 10, and then you start counting to 10 again. Otherwise you will lose them, because you'll lose count. And I ran that trap line across this face of the mountain on the two Sweetman farms and going on around to Richard Swan's. And in a period of 10 days, I caught 1,800 possums on that trap line. And one trap on one tree, I left it set there because it kept catching a possum every night, and it caught 35 possums it caught in a row out of that tree. I was averaging, and I skinned everything. I didn't chuck away the rough ones or the little ones. I skinned everything. But I was averaging $5 to $7 a skin back then. And people think they're getting a lot of money for fur today, but it probably takes 20 possums to get a kilo of fur, and if you get $100 for that, 20 possums for $100, it doesn't even compare to 40 years ago when we were trapping, you know. People made a very good living. People bought farms with possum hunting.
Yeah, there's a lot of planting. You know, you've been told about my nephew. He's organised rare plants and stuff, and a lot of places have been fenced off. And we're talking about fencing off the cliffs, so they may grow back. But yeah, it'll most likely still run some beef cattle. Bush looks very different, though. It's hard to go for bushwalks. When I was young, you could you could walk to the summit of Mount Karioi without having to worry too much about undergrowth. It was just like walking through a pine forest might be now, but it's certainly changed since then. It's nearly impenetrable in places.
You can play your part, and then the next generation will have their turn and their ideas, but they plan to continue conservation and farming hand in hand. What have I noticed? Well, what's been really interesting in the Malcolm's fenced-off areas of bush, the regrowth and the kind of things that have grown back. It wasn't always what I expected, and I didn't realise maybe how many plants were missing, and now the birds are bringing them back. Now it's fenced off.
The regeneration that, like Fred Litwack and all of that back in the day have done to our moana and our waterways, you can see that. I'm so grateful for their contributions, and the extreme waste that's pumping now, the many years that Rick and Liz and all that whānau did to get that going for us. Husband Christopher, he'd done a lot of planting, and all his wisdom at that time, I see it all now, like, it's all, everything's flourishing all the way back to the other side of the whenua where we are. It's really good to see all that happening.
I'm Crystal, and the first time I came to Raglan I was 16, and I sat out at Whale Bay and watched the surfers. It was when Raglan was still a really small town. Part of my connection to Karioi came from that connection to the water and the sea around it, and seeing Karioi as something that sustained the sea life around it as well, because Karioi doesn't stop at the water's edge, it flows right down deep into the sea. The exciting thing about being an ecologist is you kind of know the principles and you have some idea of how nature's interconnected and weaves together, and everything relies on each other and is interdependent. I distinctly remember having a conversation with Malibu. There is things that we want to achieve, and they are far out there, on that continuum, and that's the ultimate ideal maybe of what people think this project should be, or this mountain should be, or this landscape should be, but actually we're only here at the beginning.
I'm Louis Galloway. I was born in the Waikato Hospital and raised here. I'm currently working for the Karioi project, working with the biodiversity of the maunga and the surrounding areas.
Ko Terence tōku ingoa, anō taranaki ahau. My connection to the Whāingaroa started when I moved down to Hamilton to look after my mum in Hamilton, and I would come out here and hang out at the beach when I had my days off. I camped at the Ruapuke campground. One morning I woke up and went to the top of the hill, looked south, and I could see Taranaki, and I felt a real connection to this place, because I had always wanted to move home, but it was too far away from my family and my mum, so it seemed like a good place to set my feet. Bought a piece of land on the southern slopes of Karioi, planting trees and doing the things that I love to do with the land. And so my connection here is really my connection to the whenua. When I moved out here, came out here, straight away I got onto a trap line here and started doing around the Wild West Coast, Te Toto, and I did that for a couple of years, and then a position came up with the Karioi project. All the monitoring we've been doing and the mahi we're able to put in, and now have an understanding of where it's going to as well.
I guess specifically for the Karioi project, like our vision is like from Whāingaroa to Aotearoa, almost like that landscape scale of looking at this area as almost like a peninsula.
I'm involved with the Coast Care Group, for the Ruapuke Coast Care Group as well. And so being involved with the dune planting and understanding the importance of dunes now, it's blown my mind that our beaches will thrive so much better with healthy dunes.
I've only been with the project for a couple of years now. We have our volunteer days, some volunteer days start here because of the generosity of the Cornses, you know, with allowing us to access the mountain through their farm and helping us in a multitude of ways.
It's a great hub for our volunteers.
I think it's also good for, I think the Greg and Mike and Geneva are probably stoked to see a bit of life breathed into it.
Yeah, it's been awesome. It's good for them to obviously get rid of the pests and everything, but just the relationship with all the trappers and everything's great as well. You get to meet a few different people, and yeah, it's been good. It was a sharing shed. My dad built it out of bits and pieces from demolished sheds and added on to where it was a full-stand sharing shed with space underneath to store the sheep and everything. But then Mum and Dad went out of sheep. We just got left really, and it was pretty much falling down. And then the Karioi project spotted it and thought it'd be a good idea for a base for them. So they've, helped resurrect it again, which is great.
I think it's given me that real appreciation of nature and the bush, the outdoors, and nowhere else really compares. It's the best place in the world. I always feel that, and it's always the best place to come back to no matter where you've been.
Being in this place puts your nervous system at ease. It truly feels like some type of cooling effect. As soon as you come back here, it washes over you and you can just feel all of your worries dissipate. And nothing is really ever that deep or really ever that, I guess, pressing when you're here and you can see the moana and you can hear the bird song and you can be here in your home, and it really just all does slip away, and it creates, I don't know, a sense of adventure and curiosity in a lot of us, I think.
Playing as a toddler, even like a baby, blurbling and talking and stuff. And I remember walking out to the lawn and she was playing away there, just by herself, but she wasn't. She was like talking to, and I just don't think it's imagination. Like, I think that's what children have the ability to do, but like, she knew what she was talking to. Yeah. And they were having full-on conversations and, you know, the history of here with all our manu and our patipaere here and all sorts. I do think that was happening and stuff. So the environment is really important. And for me, is part of why I want to be here. I choose to stay here. I choose not to be in a town. I choose to live here because the nature itself, you can hear the birds, they swoop through you, the kiriru, you know, they duck and dive and you get to hear those sounds, and the ruru at night time. And
one of the special things I think that makes Whāingaroa so different is that we almost do have such a microclimate because we're so protected by Karioi. She almost blocks us from all of those big storms that come in, or you often feel like you're going to be nailed by an insane storm, and she's just standing there protecting us and creates this lovely little microclimate, especially up here, up at home. You can drive 15 minutes into town and it's almost like chalk and cheese. It's beautiful and tropical up here, and it can be just that little bit colder down there.
I think Karioi just provides all of that special climate, little zone thing, magic that goes on, the good and the bad. There's so many parts to her and so many stories from each different hapu and each different, both sides right round. The moana house, how the moana lets up to her, but her being that core to Whāingaroa and the moana coming into her is just, such magic.
And when you live out here, I mean, we're sitting here on a beautiful day, but it can be very harsh. It can be, you know, really windy, horizontal rain. The store will just we have to barricade it, it will just be sucked in by the wind. And you realise how dependent you are on nature and how fragile everything is when you're here. And even, you know, the mountain, we always say the mountain makes our weather. So weather could be doing, often Anthea will ring me up and say, oh, it's such and such. She rang me this morning. It's foggy in here in Raglan. You know, there's nothing like that out here. It's always different. And you realise how you've got to work with nature. It's a really powerful force. And it's a privilege and a responsibility to live and farm somewhere like this. It's also fragile. Yeah.
Karioi has had a huge impact in the mahi that I do, so not only physically but spiritually. There's a lot of narratives that Māori have, and one of the narratives would be ko te maunga, ko te maunga ko au. We have a strong spiritual connection to our landscape. I am the mountain and the mountain is me, and what we actually are referencing to when we say these whakatauki is that it connects us in a spiritual context to our landscape, to our whakapapa, to our genealogical links. So for me, growing up, not only have I nurtured that whakatauki, but I feel that's been part of just the mahi toi over the years through being a student at Raglan area school, but more so in Te Ropo Ara ki Te Reo. We were expressing Karioi through our mahi back then. And yeah, Karioi maunga has always been a special place.
Well, Karioi, which is an ancient stratovolcano, is one of only a handful of volcanoes on Earth where the products of intraplate and subduction type volcanism, which are the two principal types of volcanism, have occurred together at the same place at the same time in the same volcanic system. This makes Karioi, in terms of its rock composition, halfway between subduction volcanoes like Ruapehu and intraplate volcanoes like Rangitoto or the other South Pacific Islands, Rarotonga, Tahiti, Hawaii.
Alongside in a parallel life of mine was my passion for carving. And I began carving when I was about 10 and was incredibly fortunate because I used to catch a bus as a young man from Howick into the museum, and I used to go there and I'd be drawing carvings, Māori carvings, and coming home and experimenting. And I was picked up by the archivists at the museum, and I got to go down into the archives of Auckland Museum regularly and looked at drawer after drawer after drawer of taonga, some of which was placed, we knew what it was about, and others of it nobody really knew much about. But it was an extraordinary experience, and it really coloured my passion for carving for a long time. I completed a Bachelor of Māori Visual Arts about 16 years ago. So I had a chance to really get into the archives and find some of the old books and would agonisingly translate a lot of Māori texts for me to learn. So that's how I came to that. So these two things have now collided in my life. And part of that collision is around Karioi. So when I retired from teaching, I worked at a carving studio in Hamilton, which was working with pounamu and whalebone. And occasionally the odd piece of argillite and basalt would come in, and I knew that Karioi had basalt fields, lots of it. So recently Oliver has clarified some of that for me, but his understanding when he talked to me about it was that most of the basalt wasn't suitable for carving. He'd been told that by carvers. That's not true. It's true of a lot of the stone, a lot of the basalt, because it's in the lava flow, and lava flow basalt tends to be fractured, so it's difficult to work. But there's thrown boulders on Karioi of basalt. They cool differently, and they have been used as long as Māori have been here for making tools. She provides with us and has provided Māori with material for doing stone tool work. And let's remember, not all of it's woodworking, a lot of it's agricultural. A lot of the adzes you find are agricultural adzes. This is made of stone of Karioi. And it's made in a more modern form. You can see it's not anywhere near as thick and heavy as that. But it works beautifully. And clonk you and it would hurt. And in the stone, again, Oliver, the geologist, will talk about the fact that there's, on this mountain, there's olivine basalt, onewa. And the green here, this green that you can see here, and the speckles through it of green are the olivine in the basalt. That's a semi-precious stone in the basalt. So it's a pretty good indicator for stone coming off Karioi. Not many other basalts have olivine in them. And they were shaped here and quarried here, and there's a number of different stones that were quarried here. This is what Karioi brings to you. She brings you this beautiful stone, that she gave up her stone for thousands of pieces of work that kept men fed and their whānau.
One of the beautiful elements that Karioi has managed to provide is this beautiful kōwhatu, this beautiful stone, which over the years Karioi has sustained a lot of tikanga Māori. You know, we've used elements, whether it be in rākau, whether it be in, you know, harakeke with different kōwhatu. Karioi has sustained a lot of our narratives. So one of those materials being the kara, the basalt. Yeah, and I've always considered the basalt to be such a beautiful taonga, a hidden gem, so to speak. A lot of people don't really, you know of this particular kōwhatu. I think the special thing about this particular stone for me is that it has come from our whakapapa. You know, it's our resource, and that's what makes it so special to me. There's no stone better than the stone that's produced from your maunga. One of the nice elements about our specific kōwhatu out here, the kara and onewa, is that it's really dense. It almost sounds like a metal, you know, it's so dense that it can be challenging to sculpt. One lovely part about the onewa that I like is that it's very little imperfection. So if you look at the basalt from Tamaki Makaurau, from Rangitoto, that's made up of a lot of porous, and we don't have that in our onewa here. It's just flawless, and it polishes up really nice and dark. It's a really nice raw elements to it, where often in my mahi, in the work that I do, I try to really emphasize that and let the stone speak for itself, like its natural, oxidization of the stone. You know, there's nice lines that are just formed over thousands of years, and even in its cooling process. I met with a geologist who was sharing its cooling process and how it shards from being cooled down quite rapidly, and hence all the lines that you naturally appear.
I learned a few weeks ago, a few months ago now, from Oliver, who did the whakapapa of Karioi for us, which is, we see her, but what was her whakapapa? And the Māori world is all about whakapapa. And so it was good to hear from him that she's actually over 2.6 million years old. That's pretty old, that's amazing. So it was great to actually, she's unique. And some of the stones and the rocks that came out of her that he found are only unique to Raglan. When you come here, when you look at a place and it looks inviting, most people find it a healing place, which it is. We're a slow town still, because there's nowhere to go. I mean, the town has been built on a strip that ends up in the ocean. It wasn't well thought out, because it was planned in England. They looked at a map and they chunked a plonk of streets on top and said, that's where we'll put our streets, and they did. There's been numerous challenges over time. I mean, You know, right from the beginning, all that land on the other side of the harbour, which is our land, was confiscated by the British, you know, 1863. So holding on to land that was important to us, from Bryant Home out to Whale Bay is Māori land. I mean, it was a native reserve set aside only for Māori. A road went through which the Jacksons were responsible for. You know, to get to town, they didn't want to go right around Ruapuke, so they put it through the middle of a Māori block of land to open it up. And what's happened is we now have Manu Bay owned by the council. We have 3 subdivisions, all in a place that was reserved totally for Māori as a traditional base. You know, we were left with responsibilities to make sure that this place was left for the next generation. The things that we inherited should be there for our children to inherit, our mokopuna. And pretty hard trying to keep to that kaupapa. Some people have just walked away. It's just too hard. It's a modern world. Different rules apply. Tikanga no longer applies. Like when I was growing up, every family had a space they cared for. No one else dared to come in and take from their place. Like out at Manu Bay, there was a crayfish nursery belonged to the Honakus. No one would go there and get crayfish. That crayfish bed is now under a jetty or a law, what do you call it, a ramp. Went to law school, got a degree, not to become a lawyer, but to understand the toolbox as to how it worked. And so I've never gone into the paid legal profession. It's a really good tool to have to understand how everything works or is supposed to work. For me, a hapu is strong if in fact the whānau know who they are, where they're from. And so when you bring more people home, you can actually build a stronger hapu. I think there is some of our whānau, as I said, who are probably disconnected. I was down with a group yesterday. They'd come from the Hawke's Bay. They've come back, been away 80 years. So they're connecting back. You know, our biggest obligations are kaitiakitanga to our space. And trying to grow people who are environmentally focused at a time when they're busy trying to earn money to live in hard times, it's really difficult. So we've got a few young ones coming through saying, I want to help, I want to do this, I want to do that. So we just need a few more of them to step up and get involved to carry on the fights that will be there in the future. I want to do something creative, which is write my stories for the next generation, the struggles, all the stuff that may actually help them to navigate some of that stuff. We're in good heart in terms of numbers. It's just a matter of actually building the capacity in the areas we need to actually have a very strong hapu. You know, my mother, when she was young and she was in town married, happily married, her mother wanted to come home here. And she didn't want to come home because she said Māori land is just a lot of trouble. So down here to Kōpua, this was her papa kainga. She was 15, she was at school, she came home from school and they had demolished her meeting house. And the village, all her people had disappeared to the other side of the harbour, up the mountain into Hamilton, Frankton. The only one who didn't go was my grandmother. She just refused to leave. Had it not been for her, I think we would have lost it all. And had it not then been for my mother to pick up the pieces and say this is wrong, I mean, she was all into justice, truth and justice. And she was lucky she had someone like my dad, who was right behind her, never up the front, always at the back, making sure that if you're going to have a hui, I'll feed the people, you know, kill a cow, whatever. So, you know, they worked like that. And I mean, it was a struggle. This down here was a really hard struggle to get the land back because people didn't think she could do it in the tribe. You know, often she was standing alone. But because she had lots of friends from the land march and different ones around that did have faith, and then getting arrested and going to court was, she said, the best thing that had happened, because it meant that all of those, the facts and figures and evidence went before a court of law and proved that, yep, this should have come back. No, you weren't trespassing on your urupa. So, and then the government had to do negotiate the return, which took 5 years.
So in my lifetime, I've seen lots of changes, political changes, etc. Demographics have changed considerably since I was a child. When I was at Te Mata School, there were large Māori families. All the families had 10, 11, 12 children. I don't think there's many Māori families, local families, attending that school nowadays. I think there's a lot of lifestylers who've moved into the area. We've been, I think, fortunate at Phillips Road because we still have a lot of land and Māori ownership. You've got a very different community now. Of course, that's a natural part of change. And those communities bring in fresh ideas, new ways of looking at things. There's benefits in that. The challenges for us really is about reconnecting our people first and foremost to this landscape, because most of our people live away from this area, reconnecting them to this area, reconnecting them to their whakapapa, reconnecting them to knowledge, reconnecting them to their political history. When you have a knowledge of all of those, it anchors you. It anchors your identity. Because when you know who you are, when you know your landscape, when you know your history, you can face anything.
I truly believe that as an artist, it's my obligation to uphold tikanga, you know, and express Māori narratives. A lot of these patterns reference to nature, and I always tell, whether it be in tāmoko or whakairo, you know, these patterns didn't fall from the sky yesterday. They've been handed down upon generations. So for me, I feel really privileged. To be honest, I feel really privileged that I've been born into this art form, and that my tupuna have laid out this art form. And for myself, I'm just stepping into it to express myself. And yeah, so for me, it's really important that tikanga integrity is upheld. A huge inspiration just comes from being Māori, knowing the history, having growing up, learnt the history, you know. I take my hat off to one of the teachers that we had, which was, I mentioned, J Love, and you know, he had us doing a lot of research around Te Tiriti o Waitangi, you know, the Declaration of Independence, and that has had a huge impact. So it's really important that a lot of narratives are expressed and upheld.
I mean, our people name things for reasons. And Karioi, you know, maybe some people say it's to linger in a place for a while. Other people say it's about she's one of the mountains that carries a kōrero into all the other mountains on the coast. Yeah, there's lots of different kōrero. But close relationships between all of them, you know, between Pirongia, Kakepuku, Karioi, Karewa. You know, when Oliver was talking about coming to do Karioi, I said, what about Karewa? And of course he put his thinking cap on, why would I be doing Karewa? And then suddenly he realised there is a relationship. The rocks of Tamaihine, or Karewa, the children of him, actually on Karioi, are the same rocks as out there. So our stories to our children obviously have a grain of, you know, there's a bit of truth in there.
Every word has a context. You can't just take a word and split it in two, or take a word thinking that this is what you think it is. So particularly with those old names, you really need to be cognizant of its importance to Māori, because that's where those words emerge from a Māori world. For example, several years ago, we returned the name Wairangi to one of our pou whenua. So pou whenua is a significant site. It was called Bridalveil Falls, and that was only named in really 1933 by the New Zealand Railways Society. But they were putting it on tourism brochures because it sounded better than Wairangi, which Pākehās had interpreted as the waters of hell. So when you have a colonised lens and they think that they can change names to suit them, then that's what you get. I mean, it's similar when I think about Karioi and how people refer to Karioi as the sleeping lady. I mean, where does that come from? We don't refer to Karioi as a sleeping lady. Mountains are metaphors for tribal history. They're metaphors for mana. They are sung about in waiata.
I've been a mural artist and youth mentor. I've had the privilege of travelling throughout the motu, more specifically in the Waikato area, with delivering art workshops, being a youth mentor, currently doing a memorial set that we are refurbishing that had been painted in 2016, I believe. And that set will be completed this week in commemoration to a young rangatahi here in Whāingaroa. Also, we have just completed a art workshop with some rangatahi over the weekend, and they had the privilege of painting a mural alongside myself at the Regland Community House. Those mural concepts were put together with myself and Toitū Whāingaroa. Very privileged to be a part of that group to create self-expression, which is something that I love to engage with the youth, with allowing them to express themselves with what's going on in the world, what's going on in their own life, what's going on in the community. Self-expression it's a personal journey. Through the workshop that we had over the weekend, they were able to create a piece of artwork on canvas, and because I've did this for so many years, I can empathise and see rangatahi of being whakamā of what the person next door to them is, thinking about their artwork. But I really reinforce that it's not what anybody else thinks, it is how you feel, and the way it makes you feel is more important than what anyone else thinks. Self-expression comes from within. So when it comes from within, it's coming from a place where it is relevant to who you are as an individual, regardless of what race, creed or culture you come from. But also I think having a system in place so that it's passed down, because there's always going to be changes throughout the years through different rangatahi, through different courses and what have you. But I think if there's enough support to carry on something that can help our rangatahi for generations to come, it's a winning formula.
Coming out here as a young kaiako, somewhat 20 years later, was a blessing, like to be able to come and work amongst the community, give back teaching and growing up pretty much as a young person, because you're still quite young as 20. And being with our young rangatahi at the local kura here at Raglan Area School was such a privilege. You end up getting another life chapter again, I think.
I think in Te Ao Māori, that's a huge part of raising tamariki is submerging them in Te Ao Māori, keeping our culture alive. Keep up my tamariki, come to help out here at the studio. They're part of different wānanga that are held here, that have been established here in Whāingaroa around celestial navigation. It's a really important part for myself and my partner to just raise our kids upholding those values. Yeah, whether it be in kapahaka, work ethics, just these handing down these values that have been, it's about passing them on for our future generation.
Well, the future is really with the young people and the next generation, and handing over to them, handing the vision across of farming in partnership with nature. And our son Jack, who will be the next one on the farm, that's what he wants to do. He wants to continue that, fencing off more streams, looking after the bush.
You know, I speak to the Jacksons, and they told me when I first spoke with them that they have a 500-year plan for the mountain. And I love that idea. You know, we're not planning for me or for my kids or for the next generation, but, you know, for well into the future. So when you plant a kahikatea tree that's spindly and sitting like this in the open, and, you know, 3 years later it still looks spindly and like nothing on it, you know, my vision is that these kahikatea will be, you know, there'll be just stands of them through all our wetlands and through all our lowland areas, and all the trees that I walk past in the bush when we're doing our mahi up there will be towering, towering above us.
What does the future look like for our hapu? I'm optimistic that aware of people who've always risen to challenges, even in the bleakest of times. And so for many tribal groups, they had this saying, "Ki mihi te mea ngaro," search that for that has been lost, that will sustain you in times of darkness. That search is looking back into our past and finding those old sayings, whakatauki, waiata mō te atea, where bleak times have been described in detail, but also hope is also there, filtered through all of those whakatauki and all of those mō te atea, the sayings from our people. Because in the end, we are travellers across the oceans. We've withstood storms, tempests, tsunamis before, and we've survived. And so we're also going to be survivors in this new world.
It's been great to see other cultures come to Whāingaroa and bring their reo and their kai and their friendliness and things, but it's really good for our haukainga, our ahika, the whānau from here, Ngāti Tahinga, Ngāti Mahanga, Ngāti Koata, all those ahika still hold ground. That's really beautiful to have.
Yeah, always positive in trying to look forward to the future. You know, I've whether it be heading overseas to symposiums, you know, you just feel like you're opening up doors, opening up a new chapter in my life, but also through the mahi tamoko, you forever trying to find a balance in the different mediums. It's been just really overwhelming. It's been so well received in terms of just expressing tēnei taonga tuku iho, this beautiful art form, expressing myself through te ao Māori. The beautiful thing about attending symposiums is that you're engaged with different artists from all around the world. You leave with amazing connections. It can be a quite emotional experience traveling overseas because, you know, you're, as an artist, or personally, I'm always trying to just really whakamana te ao Māori. Toi Māori is really well received because it's something that's never been, you know, seen over in Europe. You know, there's a lot of interest because of the fact that you're Māori, you know, being Indigenous from Aotearoa. It's really well received, and I think that can often be, when I talk about it being overwhelming, you know, sometimes it's more received or accepted overseas than it is back home in some instances. To be able to express that kōrero is really neat. Yeah, when I come home from overseas, you just feel so lucky. It isn't until you head overseas that you realise how privileged we really are, you know, in the landscape that you know, the birthright of being a uri from Karioi maunga, yeah, growing up here. Yeah, you know, and to obviously come home and reconnect with my whānau, to have that downtime, that's all part of motivating me to push myself in the mahi that I do. Yeah, Karioi maunga has been an identity for te ao Māori for many generations and will forever be. You know, when people ask where you are from, traditionally Karioi maunga would be, or you would say, ko Karioi te maunga. So you're referencing Karioi as a landmark to connect you back to that particular wāhi, a particular area. Now we use, you know, where are you from? I'm from Raglan, I'm from Whāingaroa Raglan. But traditionally, in the traditional context, we would say our mountain, yeah? And to this very day, I always like referencing that. Yeah.
He aroha roha nei ahau, tēnei mātou e te iwi, e noho nei. I ngā tai whakarongo e, ko te tūmu hoki a te iwi e, he aroha roha nei ahau. Whaingaroa te moana, Aotea he whenua, ka whia he tangata e, ko te tūmu hoki a te iwi e, he aroha roha nei ahau. Tai nui te waka, hotura he tangata, I tū ai te kimi e, ko te tūmu hoki a te iwi